Before there was an AJ Foyt, or an Al Unser, or a Rick Mears, there was another icon of the Indianapolis 500. One that surely would have joined them in the four-time Winners Club if he hadn't met a tragic end on Memorial Day 1955. This is the story of Bill Vukovich, one of the Indy 500's greatest heroes, and his short but incredible career. Two-time Indy 500 winner Roger Ward called Vukovich probably the greatest actual driver we have ever known in terms of his skill and his determination. Born in California in 1918 to Yugoslavian immigrants, Vukovich had to drop out of school at the age of 14. After a poor harvest on his father's farm, the elder Vukovich passed away, forcing the family to have to sell the land. Bill and his older brother provided for the family by working on the farm of a neighbor that allowed the Vukovich family to rent a house on their property. At the height of the Great Depression, to say things were tough would be quite an understatement. The only escape for the young Vukovich was racing. As a teenager, he had driven the family's Model T around the fields of their house when his parents weren't home. As he got older, his mother required constant medical care, and seeing as she only spoke Serbian, Bill had a busy schedule. He'd tend the neighbor's farm in the morning, be at the hospital with his mother during the day to communicate with doctors, and after the sun went down, he was working on his race cars. Vukovich really got his start doing odd jobs for racers out in California until he and his brothers scrounged up enough money to turn junk cars into race cars. His big break happened when he started driving a roadster owned by Fred Gerhardt, and despite a serious crash in 1936, he continued on. Vukovich, like so many others, had to put racing on hold during World War II, as he served as a Jeep mechanic for the Army, but after the war ended, he was back to the racetrack. Vukovich in the late 1940s and early 1950s had swapped out his stock car and took on the world of midget racing. Ever a tenacious racer, Bill had told his brother Eli to get out of his way and that he's just another car on track to pass. Now these two were in the business of making a living doing racing and lifting themselves out of poverty. And yet, winning races still meant a lot. It wasn't just a means to an end. Vukovich had the real passion. Winning the United Racing Association's West Coast Championship in 1946 and 1947, Vukovich established himself as the dominant driver in midget racing in California. By 1950, he captured the AAA National Midget Crown. The AAA also sanctioned championship cars, and Vukovich was poised to finally make a step up to the big time. All roads now led to the Indianapolis 500. A failure to qualify in his first attempt at the 500 in 1950 did not dampen his spirits, and he returned in 1951, making the race, qualifying 20th. Although far from having a strong chassis engine combination, Vukovich had made his way into the top 10 by lap 15. This would be short-lived as the oil tank ruptured, ending his race. Although his maiden Indy 500 didn't last long, Vukovich took to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway almost immediately. His aggressive yet clever driving style really gelled with Indy. His performance in 1951 opened the eyes of Howard Keck, a millionaire car owner who needed a replacement for the retiring Maury Rose, a three-time 500 winner in his own right, for 1952. Now Vukovich would be in great equipment, the Curtis Craft chassis and the Offenhauser engine, the dominant chassis-engine combo in the 500 in the race's golden era. Starting the 1952 edition of the race from the middle of the third row, Vukovich quickly charged to the front of the field, grabbing the lead on lap 7, and holding it for an astonishing 150 laps. Sadly, with just 9 laps to go, his car's steering linkage broke, and Vukovich was forced to retire the car, handing the win to Troy Ruttman. Gutted by a late race DNF did not deter Vukovich, but only made him hungrier. He retired from midget cars entirely, and focused solely on winning the Indianapolis 500 and the large payday that would come with it. 1953 was perhaps one of the toughest Indy 500s, with sweltering heat bearing down from the Indiana skies. Vukovich, starting from pole, drove off into the distance, and as other drivers turned their cars over to relief drivers, Vukovich insisted on going the full distance. On his final pit stop, he took a swig of water, poured the rest down his back, then rejoined the race to claim the Indianapolis 500, leading 195 of the 200 laps. The 1954 Indy 500 highlighted just how much Vukovich had become a cerebral all-around racer, rather than just an aggressive charger. With his car now 2 years old, it didn't have the same speed that it had in prior years. It took him nearly half the race to get to the lead from his 19th starting position, but after the final round of pit stops, Vukovich dominated the last quarter of the race to claim his second straight 500 win, and in the process run the fastest race in Indy 500 history to that point. There was no one to stand in Vukovich's way at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. If not for a broken steering linkage in 1952, he would have won 3 straight, each in dominant fashion. Fortunately for him, he still had 1955 to make history. Although he had to drive for a new car owner, he brought along most of Howard Keck's mechanics with him. From the middle of row 2, Vukovich once again came alive on race day, and looked to be putting another hurting on the field. But on lap 56, with Vukovich leading, a melee occurred on the backstretch when Roger Ward spun, possibly from a broken axle. Several cars scattered to avoid him, but the one driven by Johnny Boyd tagged Vukovich. This sent Vukovich towards the outside wall, but the force had lifted the nose of his car. The rear of Vukovich's car hit the wall while the nose was airborne, causing him to start cartwheeling over the backstretch wall and into a parking lot, where his car hit several cars and possibly a lamppost before catching fire. Vukovich had died at the age of 36, and what could have been the greatest career in Indy 500 history came to a tragic end. Bill Vukovich's legacy, however, lived on. His son, Bill II, became an IndyCar driver in his own right, finishing second in the 1973 Indy 500 and winning a race in Michigan later that year. His grandson, Bill III, was also a top competitor in midgets and modifieds on the West Coast before getting his big break in the Indy 500. Billy, as he was known, became the first ever third-generation starter in the Indy 500, but like his grandfather, met a sad end, losing his life in a practice session for a sprint car race at Mesa Marin Raceway in 1990. The Vukovich family, like many that came through the racing world in the middle of the 20th century, saw great triumph and tragedy and everything in between. I'm not sure we'll ever see someone dominate the Indy 500 the way Bill Vukovich did. Sure, other drivers have gone on to win 3 and even 4 Indy 500s, and Helio Castroneves continues to search for his 5th, but when you look at the numbers, Vukovich really stands out. Despite only competing in 5 Indy 500s, he still sits 9th in all-time laps led in the race's history, ahead of the likes of Rick Mears, Tony Kanaan, Dario Franchitti, and Castroneves. And you have to remember, in 2 of his 5 Indy 500s, he didn't make it past lap 60, which highlights how dominant Vukovich really was. He led an otherworldly 71% of the laps he ran in the Indy 500, a number that dwarfs everyone in the race's history with the exception of Frank Lockhart, the 1926 winner who only started 2 Indy 500s. The passage of time has relegated Vukovich to an afterthought when it comes to discussing greatest Indy 500 drivers, for all those except true diehards, but for my money, he remains the most dominant driver in the history of the race. Who knows how many wins he could have rattled off if he stayed alive. But his story is a microcosm of the mid-century racing world. Great fame and fortune was just around the corner, but drivers constantly faced an uphill battle when it came to safety. The sport was ever-changing, and the speeds kept creeping up, but the safety lagged behind. He put it all on the line to chase his dream, and that's why Bill Vukovich will always be one of the greatest heroes of the Indy 500. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.